In this video, I'm going to go through the features of the deck strip and how to use them. There are 8 copies of the deck strip. We have them on deck 1, 2, 3, and 4, and sampler 1, 2, 3, and 4. They're all identical and work the same. I'm going to open up the deck strip of deck 1 by clicking on the open button, and here it is here. I'm going to go through the features of ones that are probably more familiar through to the ones that are a bit more abstract and complex. So first up, we have the volume slider down here. This simply raises and lowers the volume of the track. This is what you'd map to your main volume fader of your controller. Moving up, we have the EQ section. So there's 3 dials here. These are pretty standard. We have the highs, we have the mids, and we have the bass, otherwise known as low. You can double click these to reset them back to the default values, which is 107. So it's worth noting that 107 equates to 0 decibels. The reason I've done this is because most dials on hardware controllers or faders have a resolution of 127. So I can actually bring this up to 127, but it's now at plus 6 decibels. If I open up the EQ that it's controlling down here in the bottom left, you'll see that we are up to plus 6 on the highs. Whereas if I double click this and bring this down to 107, we're at 0 dB or negative 0.3 decibels. We have mute buttons for each of these, so this will turn off the entire EQ channel. So we can mute the highs, we can mute the bass, just have the mids playing, bring the highs back in, bring the bass back in. We can mute all of them with this button down here. This will mute all of them, which pretty much equates to silence, so be careful with that button. We have a reset all, which will reset all of the faders back to their natural position of 107. So let's say I'm here and I click on reset all, they're all going to jump back to 107. I find this really handy for when I'm in the middle of a mix and a drop's about to come in the next track, and I need to make sure that everything is bang on 0 dB when that happens. There's also a negative infinity all. This is different to mute all. Mute all will actually mute the individual low, mids, and highs, or the bass, mids, and highs, whereas negative infinity all will bring all of these faders down to 0. Like so. Next to these, we have the slide dial. The slide dial works by moving from the current value to the value that you set on the slide dial over an increment of time based on this checkbox here. So let's say I choose 1, that equates to 1 bar. This is synced to the BPM of the track. So I've chosen 1 bar, I'm going to bring the bass down and click slide. You'll see how over 1 bar, the bass slid from 107 down to 0. If I bring this up to 107, let's choose 2 bars and click slide. So now that's moved over 2 bars. And again, I find this handy, especially for taking the bass out of a track. Let's say I choose 16 bars here, and I want to slide the bass out over 16 bars. So I'm going to bring the slide down to 0 and click on slide. You'll see this now slowly over 16 bars is going to fade away. So it's just a handy way to free up your hands if you want to move on to some effects or EQing the other tracks. This is a really easy way to fade things away or fade things back in. And of course there is a slide all button. Let me bring these down here, choose 1 bar, and I'm going to click on slide all. Actually, let's make them all 107. I'm double clicking, by the way. This will revert it back to its default value. And let's click slide all. And they're all going to slide up to 0 dB. Next up, we have the pass filters. So this is a pretty standard low pass and high pass filter. I did originally have this as 1 knob, but I find it much more versatile to have 2 individual knobs. So they're located here. We have a low pass filter and a high pass filter, a resonance, and a drive. So I'm going to turn on the low pass filter and start bringing this down. You'll hear all the frequencies above this point are being cut off. You can see the corresponding filter here moving down. So we can open that and close it down. I'm going to turn that off and move across to the high pass filter. I'll turn this on and bring this up. I use the high pass filter a lot when I'm mixing, especially for music, techno. I like to bring the high pass up rather than bring the bass out. I find it's a lot smoother to bring this up like so. And if I'm in a mix and things aren't really going as nicely as I would like, you can just keep going and the track will slowly disappear. The res is the Q, or the point of attenuation of that cutoff frequency. So if I was to bring this up and now bring up the high pass filter, you can hear it much more prominently. If we bring this right up, it can get really ringy. You've got to be a bit careful. And we can bring this down. And drive is just to give it some real grunt. So be careful with that. Next up on the list is the filter sweep. So the filter sweep is a little bit different. What this allows you to do is take away a certain chunk of frequencies in the audio or boost them. So let's say I want to get rid of the mid-range frequencies, but the mid dial here isn't quite cutting it. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on the sweep here. You'll see it's now enabled, and I'm going to bring the gain down, and you'll see we now have a notch or a pole that is dipping down in the audio spectrum, and I can sweep this around with this fader, so I can isolate a particular area of the frequency spectrum and bring it down. Let's bring the gain down even more, and let's spread the Q out to give it more of a wide band. So now that's quite wide. So this is a real kind of technical, well, not technical, it's just if you really want to get intense with your mixes, and let's say you've got 4 tracks all playing at once, usually there's going to be some pretty major clashes in various different areas of the frequency spectrum. So this is a good way to kind of let things get out of the way, or if I go in the opposite direction, you can boost particular areas. So if I bring the Q up really, really strong and bring the gain up, you'll hear how it's really isolating a frequency now. It's actually getting quite ringy. We can click reset to reset all these back to 0, and we'll turn that off. Next on the list is I'm going to go to the filter shelves. Now these are similar to the low pass filter and the high pass filter, however these are very, very hard shelf filters. So where are we here? These are located here. There's only 2 of them, and these have very sharp curves on them. So if I was to turn this on and bring it down, you see how this band of frequencies is cut off very, very suddenly, whereas the low pass filter and the high pass filter, it kind of ramped off and let through some of the frequencies, whereas this won't. If I turn this one on as well, we can really isolate just a band of frequencies. This is really good for looping and kind of, you know, if you're looping something over and over and you just want a small segment, let's just say you want the highs, you just want these hi-hats coming through. I'm just going to re-trigger my track here just to restart it. See how you can really isolate frequencies. So consider these as frequency isolation tools. Okay, what else do we have here? Let's move up to the looper. So the looper works like a traditional CDJ looper, except it doesn't have a punch in and a punch out point. You click a button to determine how long it's going to loop for. I'm going to move the track ahead a bit just so we can get something a little bit more busy. So let's say I want a 1 bar loop. I'm going to click on the 1 button here. And it's just going to repeat itself. You can see the playhead here moving back 1 bar each time it's finished. I could go half a bar, or quarter of a bar. When I want the loop to continue playing, I click EXT, or exit. Let's go for 2 bars. And you can do big ones up to 8 bars long. I won't wait for that to happen. It's worth noting that when you click the button, it's going to treat from when you click it as the end point of the loop. Now let's talk about the effect unit, which is over here. So this is a collection of 32 different effects which I've made myself that I think would work well when applying to this situation, so mixing 2 tracks together, 3 tracks together, whatever. Some of them you might be familiar with. We've got delay and things and reverbs and flanges. Some of them are quite unique and different. Now the way this works is there are 5 dials for each of these. So each effect, the 5 dials will control something. The amount will always control how much of that effect is being applied. The time will determine how quickly it happens, or if there's a delay, how short the delay is. So these are different depending on what the effect is, the feedback usually has something to do with how much of that effect is, or how intense that effect is, and then the A and the B are very dependent on what the actual effect is. So let's just stick with the flanger. I'm going to turn this on with the on button, and I'm going to bring the amount up. You can hear the flanger being applied now. So if I move the time, this is going to be the flanger time. You can't hear too much at the moment, so let's bring the feedback up. Let's bring the A up and the B up. You'll hear we've got some movement happening now, so this is controlling an LFO. Let's try a different effect. Let's just go for a simple delay. I'm going to be using the effect dial here to scroll through them, but you can use the arrows for the left and right here, and of course those are MIDI mappable. I find it easier to have these mapped to buttons so I can flick through the effects. Let's just choose, we'll choose metal. Let's turn it on. Bring the amount to about halfway. Let's bring the time shorter. So you can see the A is controlling a bandpass filter of what is being affected by the metallic sound, and B is how thin that is. So you're going to have to play with these and get used to them and find out what they all do. There's so much to go over here, so I'm not going to, or maybe I'll do a separate video on all 32 effects, but we'll see. Let's pick another one. Spectral resonator, this is a good one. Let's bring the amount right up. The time determines the pitch. And we have A and B here, which is, I think, is the spread and the shift. It's also worth noting there is a quantize button. So again, this is dependent on what effect you have, but if there's anything to do with time in the effect, such as an LFO or a delay, the quantize will snap the amount or the timing of that to the BPM. So it will actually be in sync with the BPM, but when this is off, it's completely free. Okay, let's talk about the LFO, or the modulation, which is next to it. The LFO is a low frequency oscillator, which is a constantly moving signal that you can attach to either the amount, the time, the feedback, the A, or the B. So this is to get things moving, to get the effect operating without you. So there's a few dials that we have here. I'm going to turn it on. I'm going to bring the amount up, and I'm going to send it to a destination. Currently the destination is set to none. If I click on the right arrow here, we can choose where we want to send it. Let's say we want to send it to time. I'm going to bring the rate up so there's a bit of movement, and you'll see that this LFO is now moving the time automatically. So if I was to turn the spectral resonator on and bring the amount up, we can bring the rate up to make it faster. We can bring the amount down so it's not applying so much. Let's bring the offset up, so this will shift it. So you see as I move the offset, it's moving up the time. So the LFO is still operating at the same amount, we're just shifting to whereabouts on the time dial that it's happening. That's quite cool. And of course we can send this to any of these values. We could send it to the amount instead. So let's bring the offset down and we'll bring the amount up. Let's change the wave shape of the LFO. So currently it's a sine, it's a nice smooth sine wave. Let's try a saw up. See how it's snapping back and then slowly moving up, or we could do the opposite. It's going to snap up and then slowly move down. We have triangle as well, which is like the sine but with sharp edges. We have a square, which is suddenly off and on. And we have a random. So it's going to pick random increments there. Okay, we also have a sync button. So I'm going to pick the saw down here. Let's pick a different effect. Let's go with the melody. So I'm going to keep the LFO assigned to the amount, and I'm going to turn on this button here, which is going to go in sync mode. And now I'm going to change this to the time increment that I want. Let's say half a bar, and I'm going to bring this up. So you see that this is now moving at half of a bar, and if I was to bring the BPM up here, it's always going to be half a bar. It's synced to the BPM. There's one more button here, which is the re-trigger. So if you find that the LFO is not quite in sync, if you like, so it's moving at the right time, but it's not in the right place, you can click re-trigger to trigger that. See how when I click that, it starts the process over again. So you can click this on the beat. Let's try a saw down. Let's assign it somewhere else. Let's say I don't want that there. There we go. So again, there's a lot to go through here with these effects. I highly encourage you just to start playing with them and muck around and figure out what each one does. Next up, or the final thing here, is down the bottom we have, let me just turn the modulation and the effects off. Down the bottom we have 6 dials. So first up we have a gain. Now if you look at the actual volume here over on deck 1, if I bring the gain down, this is the master control. So this is like the gain on the top of a DJ mixer. So we have our volume. This is independent. You see the volume changes something in the device chain. It doesn't actually change this particular parameter. The gain will turn everything down. Now the reason that's handy is because these 5 dials here send stuff to the return tracks. So the first 3 are pretty simple. We have echo, delay, and reverb. If you look over here on the right of the template, you'll see we have a echo, a delay, and a reverb. So if I was to send this to the echo, it's now sending it through this channel, and I can assign these to dials or knobs, and I can do what I like. Let's turn that down. Let's send it to a delay. So now this is coming through the dub delay, which is a big time synced delay. So really good for these are really handy if you are mixing and you don't have enough time or whatever to use the actual effects or the dummy clips or the automaton, and you just want some real quick effect. We also have a reverb, so I'll send it across there. The 2 down here will send the deck to either the dummy injector or the automaton. I'm going to move this over here. So here's all the dummy clips here. Actually, I'm going to restart playing this track again. So as I bring this up, you'll see that the dummy clips are now active. So we're now sending the signal to the dummy clips. But the problem here is we're sending it to the dummy clips and we're sending it to the master out. And that's not ideal because we're basically just kind of doubling up the frequencies and it's going to sound muddy. So this is where the gain knob comes in handy. So if I go back to my deck here and bring the gain down, you'll see we can remove the volume from the track or sending it to the master out. However, the send, which is the dummy, is still sending a signal. So now this is, you can consider it, this is now 100% wet with the dummy clip. So if I was to choose something here, whereas if I bring the gain up, we're going to get a mix of the original and the dummy clips. So you can pick and mix these as you like. I would suggest, you know, kind of sweeping between the 2 of these, one from its min to max and one from its max to minimum, to kind of get a nice balance of what you need. And this also works for the automaton as well. So if I scroll over to the automaton and bring up this dial here, you'll see we now get a signal coming through the automaton. And let's just open that up. Make sure it's enabled and we'll clear everything. So if I was to do some modulation here, here we're getting a dry and a wet signal, but if I bring the gain down, this is just the automaton signal, and I need to make sure this is at up to 1. So there you go, that is the deck strip. I don't believe I've missed everything. There is a lot going on here, but this really is your kind of central focus point for working on the individual tracks, whether it's the decks or the sampler. And yeah, just remember that you can record a sample over here on the sampler. You can sample the track, what you're currently doing, and that includes what you've done with the effects and everything. So if you have the bass down and you have some crazy effects going on here, if you record a loop in the sampler, it's going to record the raw output of what comes out of the deck, and then you can then open up the sampler deck control here and you can apply even more effects, so you can kind of double up on everything. Okay. Rate my tutorial, guys. Leave a comment. if you're unsure of anything, please do just let me know in the comments or in the Discord, and I'll be happy to help. I know this is complex shit. This is by no means a beginner template. So if there's anything you need a hand with, just let me know.